Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of The Beast Must Die. A lot of really interesting things went down in this series premiere, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we get introduced to Francis, and it's interesting, I think they've already kind of set up this parallel between Francis and Nigel, in the sense that both of them are kind of dealing with something that went down 3 months ago, and I think it is, probably there is no connection, but maybe there is a connection between, the fact is that, Frances lost her son, Marty, 3 months ago. It was a hit and run, and we still don't know what the circumstances are around Nigel's situation, but just that he lost a colleague. We end up finding out her name's Shannon because he goes to her funeral later. But for him, it's because for him, he doesn't know why it's affecting him as much as it is. He just kind of wants it to go away. That's why he's talking to his therapist. Because he's like, I don't want to process. I don't want to deal with it. I just want it to go away. Because he ends up talking about it. The way he talks about it makes it seem like he wasn't even really that familiar with her. Maybe they were closer than he let on. But it's just kind of because later on there's a conversation of him talking to Francis where it's there's this mother who lost her 6-year-old child, and I didn't handle it the right way I should have. She deserved better. I'm better. She deserved better. I should have been at my best then, and I wasn't. For him, it's she lost a child. I just lost a colleague that I wasn't even that really close with, and we still don't even know what the circumstances was. Whatever it is, it seems like it kind of gives him a bit of a panic attack. There are certain triggers that he talked about kind of avoiding things that would kind of trigger him. But it seems like it kind of causes him to kind of have flashbacks and a bit of a panic attack. But especially in the police station when Frances got so upset and she slammed the door and it just made him panic, and she's having to dunk her head. They're both dealing with some form of, it seems like some form of anxiety. He's, like I said, he's having a panic attack, and she's just filled with so much rage and anger because she's not getting the answers she wants. It's only been 3 months. This wound is so fresh for both of them, and I think that's going to be an interesting parallel that they go through, especially because it's Nigel does seem like he is someone that he does want to try to do his best. Obviously, he's being relocated because the position opened up because D.I. Garrity ended up dropping dead. It's after everything he went through, and he just dies on a golf course. But that's also the thing, too. It seemed like this case hit Garrity in a certain way, because we don't really get too many interactions from Francis about Garrity's perspective on it, because Nigel remembers coming into the room and obviously packing up a lot of the Garrity stuff, and there was a picture of Marty, and you would have assumed, because even later on when he's looking through the file, he sees Marty's picture, he's like, wait, what? He's looking around I think, this case was important enough, he kept Marty's rock that he had drawn on, because I guess it was still on Marty at the time, and a picture on his desk. I guess you always see that in detective stories where it's there's always that one case that you just can't quite crack, and it just stays with you, and I think this stayed with him for whatever reason. And the thing is that for Nigel, he had just gotten there, and Francis, wanted to talk to somebody, and it was a thing of he just went over the file, and basically he's explaining to her basically they've done everything that they can do. But then Francis realizes, wait, how long have you been working this? It's he's honestly, today's my first day. And she's did you ever even meet Garrity? And it's no. So for her, it's so how can you come to me and say that you've done absolutely everything, and you just skimmed over the file for 10 minutes or something like that? And that's the sad truth. He was familiarizing himself with the case. He was able to pick up enough, but it is still kind of that's where Nigel feels no, she's right. I failed her. I should have done better. I should have done more, because all I did was look through a file. I didn't, I didn't give this woman my all. He definitely should have handled that better. Right, I'm handling the case now. I'm going to he should have been I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with the case, but give me time. I'm gonna look into this more. But it's just saying that the case, obviously it's we can't really do anything until some more information comes up, and obviously it's that's not what Francis wants to hear, saying that hearing it, you say like, oh, you've done all that you can, when for her it's like, I know you haven't because you're new to the job. It's not like you even talked to your predecessor, so it's not like you got all the rundown from him. It's like, no, you never even met the dude, you know? And that's what upsets Nigel the most. Because it's interesting, because obviously this place is called like what, the Isle of Wight, and it's like, for him it's like this place is kind of full of amateurs, because like the cops aren't really like full-blown cops in that particular area. It was more so like, it's more so like they're more social workers, because there's that situation later on with that kid who's using all those fake IDs, like a whole bunch of fake IDs based around his brothers. And it's like, why'd you not arrest him? It's like, the fact of the matter is he doesn't really do any crimes. Plus, his brothers are vicious bastards. So I'm like, I don't know how to interpret that as in, if I arrested him, it would have been more. Well, it's like, the way he was saying is like, his brother's going to be pissed because he's been using his ID. So it's like, it's probably like, oh, he's a vicious bastard. That little punk will get what's coming to him because his brother will beat the living crap out of him type of thing. Or whether it's just kind of like I'd rather not deal with his brother. His brother's going to get mad at him, and it's like, sure, but I also don't want to get caught up in the middle of that by arresting him. So that's why he's saying like, it's a little more like social work rather than like, at least in Nigel's perspective, a little more social work rather than actual police work. But obviously he goes to the scene where everything happens, and Nigel sees like there's flowers and stuff like there. Basically it's like a community group that basically, you know, because they keep flowers there, they even use hair dryers because they can't get actual speed guns, so they use hair dryers to kind of convince people like, hey, we're clocking your speed, slow down, you know. And Nigel's like, did it, you know, because Garrity, he brings up the picture in the rock, and, you know, the guy's like, yeah, like, it had an effect on everybody. He's like, even you? He's like, yeah, the governor thought it'd be, you know, good, you know, experience for me watching, like, basically a murder investigation, you know. So basically, like, this case kind of hit everyone in some extent, because I guess like nothing like this has ever really happened, because it, once again, as Nigel said in his own words, like, this is more like community social work. And I thought it was interesting for him where he was like, I don't have a plan B, this is my plan B. Like, for it's just a thing of almost like he's just kind of going with things like, I don't have any plans like of what I'm really sure what I want, you know. I'm just kind of going with things. This is kind of what's been thrown in front of me, this opportunity to transfer here. I'd assume it has something to do with like everything that went down with Shannon is why he got transferred here, but we don't know, because even Shannon's sister was like, I think talking to her mom or whoever, being like, yeah, that's the bloke who was with Shannon when it all went down. Once again, we still don't even know the details of like what exactly went down. He didn't even want to go to the funeral just because I think maybe it would have been triggering, or just because it's like, right, I couldn't do anything. I didn't know her that well. Like I brought up earlier, I feel like there was more to it than that, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's just, maybe that's what makes him feel even worse about it, because he didn't know Shannon that well. Maybe he just naturally keeps a lot of people at distance, and it's like, right, I didn't know her and she died, and it makes me feel bad that, like, you know, this woman died and I didn't know her. Like, if I knew her better, then maybe, you know, this is me just, you know, adding my own thoughts to it. Like, I'm not saying that he thought this or anything, but maybe he was feeling like, oh, I could have been there more so for her, comforting her if I really knew her, but I didn't. She was a stranger. We were strangers to each other. I don't know. Maybe it's just because they didn't even work together that long. Once again, they made it particular, like, to make sure that you don't know any of those details yet. So, but obviously, like, circling back to Francis's situation being like kind of a major crux of this episode, the crux of the story is she doesn't know who. They have no leads on who did it. Like, based on everything that they've looked into, it's like, you know, even her, because we find out that Francis is a teacher. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, it's like, but I think, you know, this is a pure story of revenge. So, like, you just being some regular person and some tragedy, like, tragedy can strike anyone, you know. You don't have to be some, like, oh, former government, you know, trained person like a Liam Neeson in a Taken or something for something. It's like, no, like, tragedies happen and just people want revenge. They want answers, and she wasn't able to get the answers. And I think, who knows, maybe if Nigel was you know, it's an interesting domino effect. I feel like I'm curious if Nigel was able to give her, like, if he was more on his game, if he'd handled that differently, would she? Because Nigel's, let's face it, incompetence and just the way he handled that might have just been the final straw. Like, maybe he could have been the person that stopped her from going over the edge like this. Who knows? You never fully know. Like, even if he had given her what she'd wanted, it still wouldn't have been enough. Like, you know, it doesn't bring her son back. It doesn't bring his killer to justice immediately. Like, she's waited 3 months and still nothing. There's no even idea of who it is, you know? And because she was even talking to, like, a fellow teacher being like, or her friend, it's like, well, at least they know it's a he. And she's like, no, just statistically, crimes with vehicles, it's usually men. So that's all this is. They don't know for sure that it's a guy. It's just statistically it's a guy, you know? But for her, she had to, like, get away from her job. I mean, sure, like, I wonder, did Marty go to that school too? Because, I mean, I think a lot of teachers end up doing that. They end up teaching at the same school that their, like, kids go to. I'm sure being around other kids has to be hard. And I'm curious, is that why Nigel kind of feels even more responsible? Because, like, he hasn't, we see later on, like, his sister and his niece. So I'm assuming, like, I mean, I think that's an interesting thing, because it's like, right, probably his niece, I think her name's Birdie's probably around the age of Marty, if not, probably younger maybe, but then you add in, like, oh, I have a sister, and then you hear, like, Shannon's sister talk it, you know, like, oh, let's remember her for the good, you know, like, the happy joy, not, like, what, you know, things might have been like at the end, you know, so that's why I'm like, I don't know if that's kind of parallels that are kind of being thrown his way, and why it's just, because his sister's the one that kind of convinced him to go to the funeral and try to talk to people. It doesn't seem like he did. He just said what he needed to say, like, showed up, kind of said a little to the family and bounced. But, you know, circling back to Frances, we also found out too, like, she recently lost her husband too, because, like, she takes, I think, the life insurance policy from him and basically kind of, you know, changes. She says she goes back, like, after her husband died, she went back to her maiden name. Now she wants to go back to her married name, because I guess at the very least, if she goes by I'm wondering, because I said soon, I don't know if maybe she just never put in the ever collected the insurance money. Maybe that was it. But now it's like she needs to do that. And I don't know, because at first I was like, why would she change her name? And I'm like, I guess to hide her identity from whoever it is, because, like, probably Marty's last name is probably there, and it's like Marty probably has her last name, her maiden last name. So going back to her husband's name, Lane, might be her way to kind of, like, if anyone's asked, you know, it's like, oh, like, my name's Frances, but she can, like, lie and be like, Frances, like, that way it doesn't associate. Because I guess none of the stuff related to Marty necessarily will have her name associated with it. Like, it's probably just like, oh, the mother, or probably, like, it probably does have her name in it, and by changing it to something else, she can be like, no. I mean, she even went through the trouble of cutting her hair and dyeing it blonde. So she's obviously she's looking into this. And I think it's interesting too, like, the further point about, like, oh, she's no Liam Neeson and taking, like, oh, I have a set of skills. It's like, no, she's just a teacher, a mother, just wanting answers, wanting revenge, and she's kind of stumbling her way through this, because she's walking, like, it's like, right, it's like she's going door to door asking information, and it's like, oh, are you from, like, I forgot what it was, but they're asking if she works for certain people, and then she uses her teacher badge and tries to pretend like, oh, no, I work for, like, she didn't come prepared knowing, like, oh, she's going to need that. Because obviously, like, none of the cars fit the bill of, like, what happened. She'd even thrown it out there, like, maybe it was a motorbike. She had brought that up to Nigel, but it was like, no, like, a motorbike would have gone over, like, whoever it hit, like, because sadly, Marty got thrown from the impact, but it's like, that's not what would have happened. A motorbike would have gone over his body. It wouldn't have, like, hit, is what the whole point was, and there would have been skid marks and stuff like that. But what she ends up discovering, though, is that maybe, because there was a rally, but it wasn't motorbikes, it was quads. So she starts thinking, like, it had to be a quad, so she starts looking into, like, all right, I need to, like, look into these quads that were need to be repaired. So she visits some kid's house, and like his dad comes out, and it's like, lady, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, if it was a quad that hit somebody, it would have flipped, or the driver would have gotten thrown off. Like it could, trying to say like, leave it to the cops, because obviously, lady, you have no idea what you're talking about, because it's like, right, because like a quad wouldn't be like that type of impact. He's saying like it would have like flipped or something like that, which I thought, and once again, I think that adds to the element of like, right, she's an amateur kind of stumbling her way through this, because she isn't some well-trained, she isn't and I think that adds a perspective to this story, because most stories like this, you'd get like the detective's perspective, which you'd flip back and forth with the mother, sure, but I think what makes this interesting is I feel like, once again, I feel like the story is going to bounce back and forth between Nigel and Frances, but still, I feel like Frances's perspective is kind of like the core aspect of it. Her handling it, kind of trying to find information out. So she ends up talking to a guy who had reported about the rally. He was saying like some woman in kind of like a certain flag dress. So initially, I think what Frances was kind of thinking was something on the lines of like a drag race or something. Like, was she a flag girl in drag racing? But it was like, he ends up pointing out the girl, like, right, this is her. It ends up being a woman named Lena. She's kind of like a hostess / model for a thing. And so she ends up tracking Lena down and befriending her. And obviously she's keeping up this live, like, once again, kind of stumbling through it, like, right, I'm here writing a crime novel about a hostess who goes, and goes from gig to gig, and she's a murderer. But the reason why none of the police can get her is because it's different jurisdictions, it's different places. So, and it's like, why'd you pick me? It's like, there are plenty of other hosts, because you seem like the only one that didn't hold up that plastic smile, even going with her to her photo shoot, but noticing she's got a bump on her head. It's like, what happened there? It's like, oh yeah, unless it got like, pissed drunk and just like fell. That's all it is. But then she looks at a picture. I guess it's I didn't pay attention to the date, but I guess it's a fairly recent picture of Lena, and she didn't have the mark. So it makes her think like, oh, she was in the car at the time, because the guy had said like, oh yeah, she was arguing with some guy, yelling at him about like, oh, you hit something or someone. So in her mind, it's like, right, Lena was in the car with whoever it is that ran over Marty. And it's like, I'm sure that's a little infuriating too, because it's like, what happened and you didn't never come forward for whatever reason. But she's getting to know Lena too, which is kind of sad, because like, oh, you're befriending this person. It's like, is she going to catch your ire? Like in your wrath, I mean, because it's like, she was in the car, and she might have information about who killed your son, but she didn't never report it, and it's been 3 months. The guilt might be eating away at her. Could we find out, we learn, like, obviously, like, she lost her mom, like, 8 years ago. She's living with her half-sister, and stuff like that. It's like, oh no, like, my half-sister, she's a good person. She has her issues, but still. And there's also, like, the thing of, like, her phone keeps ringing, but she's ignoring it. So obviously, yeah, Frances getting her super drunk just to kind of get her guard down, so that when she drops her off at her house, she goes to her phone, which, once again, pretty quick on I don't know whether it's just pieces of it, or whether because they show 2 different instances of her looking at Lena opening her phone. So I'm like, I think she didn't get it all in one. I think she did have to piece it together. Like, I saw part of the code there at the photo shoot. Then when we were eating chips, I had to pause, because once again, that British terminology kind of throws me for a loop for a second, like because I was literally about to call them fries. I'm like, no, they're chips, right? She got the other part of it, and so she opens it and ends up seeing that, which I'm like, I thought that was interesting, like, why Frances's name is in there, and it looks like there are missed calls as well. I don't know what that's about. I thought that was interesting. Like, if you, like, looking through her phone, like, obviously the number's George, but, like, why was all those, like, missed calls from, like, Frances? Because they look like, oh, like, you ignored those. I'm like, what's that about? I mean, maybe I'm just being stupid, because I was about to say, like, I was like, that had to be, like, now, because this is their first time meeting and stuff like that, so maybe that's her to cover up later on of, like, right, maybe she ends up taking her phone and then, later on, it's like, yeah, girl, Lena, I tried calling you over and over again, but I never could get in contact with you. What's what? Oh, and then I found your phone. Like, maybe that's the lie she's going to use, because she's going to use it to find George and then pretend like, oh yeah, you left your phone in my car because I was calling you over and over again. Like, because that's one of, like, that's the only reason why it can make sense for, like, Francis's name and number to be in, like, her phone, like, and, like, having missed calls and stuff. Like I said, maybe I'm just being stupid. But she does find a name, George. She sees some text, and she's thinking, like, right, this is the guy, this is the person. So one step closer potentially to finding out the person responsible. So yeah, it set up a lot of interesting things. From what I'm aware of, just looking it up, I think this is only a 5-episode show. So I'm like, oh, British shows, man, they're wild with the number of episodes. That's just, it always throws me for a loop, because I think this is a limited series too. I don't think it's like going to be a seat more than like one. I think it's a one-off. So, but yeah, it's definitely gonna be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.